Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, January, I always forget to look up the date, it is January 16th, 2019. I got that much right at least. So this is kind of a special day for us here at MuseScore in that, we've just released today the first update to MuseScore 3. We actually released MuseScore 3 on Christmas Eve, knowing that it was a holiday time and people maybe were going to be busy with other things, and we knew we wanted to get out regular updates, and so we kind of kept fixing bugs, kept looking at things, kept taking in user feedback, and just yesterday we released the first update to MuseScore 3. So during that time, I was taking a few weeks off from doing these cafes. This is actually the first cafe that I've done since, am I having sound? Yes, I am. Okay, cool. So this is the first cafe I've done since MuseScore 3 was actually released. In which I'm talking about MuseScore 3. That's something I've talked about it a bunch during the beta period, during the alpha period, and a lot of people were probably, well, we're not ready to look at it until the real thing is out there. Well, the real thing is out there now, and there's been an update for it already to fix some of the bugs found. So what I want to do here is just give you a brief tour. Sometimes, in these cafes, I just sort of go off in the weeds and spend a lot of time dealing with different things. I just want to do a really quick tour of some of the new things in MuseScore 3. In future cafes, maybe we'll go into more detail on individual topics. So I want to do this tour, and if you have questions, specific questions on new features or on anything else, go ahead and leave me a comment in the chat. I'll take a look and we'll either address it this week, or I'll just make a note to cover that topic in a future chat. So this is a very informal series for those of you who are new, and I don't have a script or anything like that, but I do have an article that I want you to be aware of that really highlights the new features, and I'm going to actually just follow that article a bit. So this article is right here, and I put the link there in the chat. I hope you all can see that. This is the Scoring Notes blog was formerly called the Sibelius blog, and it was dedicated to Sibelius software specifically, but now it's more general, just covers notation software. And so I wrote up a very detailed article about MuseScore 3 for this blog that was just published this morning also. So we're going to kind of follow through that article and just kind of make sure that you get to see some of what's new here. So what I'm going to do is I'll start scrolling through the article. Well, I'm not going to just keep doing that, but blah, 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 blah. Words. Pictures, yay. Okay, so the big thing that you've heard me talk about if you've paid attention to, if you've been, coming to these cafes for the last couple months, is automatic placement. This is really the big new thing. So in MuseScore 2, a score that you loaded that you create might look like this. Tempo markings will collide with notes, and other things collide with notes, and here we have a volta that's colliding with a slur, and dynamics markings colliding with hairpins. Just things are colliding with each other all over the place. There's pedals colliding with those notes, and everything's way too crowded in here. You can't even tell what's going on here. So in MuseScore 3, we're going to see that automatically, without you having to do a thing, you just add those markings and everything is just going to kind of place itself automatically and space itself automatically. With these things, it's, there's always a subjective element to how you want it to look. So, it's not like you're not going to ever want to make manual adjustments, but the point is, right out of the box, things are going to look great. So here is MuseScore 3 with that score loaded. And as you can see, everything is just exactly how you might expect it to be. I mean, there's some changes. Maybe you would want this 2 coda marking up a little higher, or you'd want this tempo marking off to the left. You don't have to disable automatic placement. This is the wonderful thing about automatic placement. It does its job and continues to do its job even when you adjust things. So for instance, I've just selected this tempo marking, and if I want to say move it over into this space here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start moving it to the left with the arrow keys. And this reminds me of the other thing that I always forget in these cafes, which is to open up my, I have a utility that captures keystrokes and displays them on screen. And I always forget to run it. All right. There we go. All right, so I click this tempo marking, and I'm going to start moving it to the left. Now watch as I move it to the left. I'm just using left. If you use Control left, it moves in larger increments. So Control left. Notice it started to come down because it doesn't need to be as high anymore to clear that slur. Move it further and it slides all the way into that slot. So you don't have to disable automatic placement to receive to be able to do these manual adjustments. Similarly, if I want to raise this coda sign right where it is, I might start raising it up. And again, if I just use the up arrow, it goes up. And notice it's starting to collide with that volta, and so it's pushing the volta up a little bit. But all I have to do is move it a little bit to the left, and the volta now doesn't collide with anything, so it comes back down. Now you might wonder, why is this volta so high? It's to make it even with the second volta, because it needs to be that high to clear this. So again, all of this is happening automatically. The default placement of everything was really good as it was, but if you want to fine-tune things, you can. You can just click them and adjust them with the arrow keys. You can also drag things if you like. It's not usually as efficient, and you have to wait until you let go of it to kind of see what effect it's going to have with auto placement. But yeah, you can kind of do that. If for whatever reason you do totally want to disable it, you can do that. If I want this two coda to overlap, like right now, it's not going to overlap that slur. If I try to move it over here, auto placement is going to move it above the slur. If I disable auto placement, you'll see it allows me to overlap the slur if I really want. So you can disable it to get things to overlap or to change what's on top of what. But anyhow, that is how auto placement works. And if you look at this score that I created here, you can kind of see how things work. Staff text appears on top of chord symbols. Tempos on top of staff text, rehearsal marks on top of that, etc. You can kind of see how these things work. So auto placement or automatic placement is, this is the main reason why MuseScore 3 exists, why we didn't just keep putting out, little updates to MuseScore 2 with new features here and there. This is a totally new thing, and it does mean that if you have a score that you've created in MuseScore 2, you bring it into MuseScore 3, if you didn't do a whole lot of manual adjustments to fix all the collisions, they're going to be magically fixed for you. If you did do a lot of manual adjustments to fix the collisions, when you load that score, MuseScore 3 is going to give you the option of resetting. So this score here, actually, is was created in MuseScore 2. In fact, here's the MuseScore 2 version. You can see it in MuseScore 2. And when I loaded it into MuseScore 3, I'll close it here. When I load it into MuseScore 3, again, it was this one here, you'll see that it offers me the option to reset the positions of everything. In other words, to undo all of my manual adjustments. And so I just say yes, and you'll get the nice default placement. If, on the other hand, over here I had already done a bunch of manual adjustments in MuseScore 2 to try to fix some things, and I'm just doing kind of a weird job of it so you can see, if I do that and save, so once again I'm getting way more detail than I expected to, but that's just me. So I'm going to call this adjusted, and I'll put it here. And notice how I did these adjustments. Let me just line these up a little more. So I'm just going to keep fiddling with things so that you can see that I've really adjusted these kind of to look like they're aligned there. All right, so now if I go to MuseScore 3 and load that version of the score in which I had all those manual adjustments, there it is, it's going to offer me that same choice. Do I want to reset my positions? And if I choose yes, then it's going to look exactly like it did before. But if I say no, it's going to keep my manual adjustments. So you can see that things were kept. Did it do a perfect job of it? Well, no. This tempo marking here in my, in MuseScore 2, I don't think I had it all the way to the left like that. So if it preserves your manual adjustments where possible, but because the defaults are different, those manual adjustments don't necessarily work the same way anymore. So it's usually to your advantage just to say reset and let automatic placement do its job. But if you've really worked hard to do a lot of manual adjustments, you can say no, let me keep my manual adjustments, and then just fix things up as you need to make it look a little more like it did before. So anyhow, that's automatic placement. It's really a wonderful thing, and I encourage people to create your new scores with MuseScore 3. Look to see what it can do for you. When you have MuseScore 2 scores and you import them, yeah, if you did a lot of manual adjustments, don't be in a hurry to import it into MuseScore 3 unless you want to spend a little time fiddling with things. But for new scores, it's just going to do absolutely fantastic job. Okay, so hi to everyone that's here. I keep checking my phone just to look and make sure I don't have questions or anything, but I see people saying hi, and I'm saying hi back. Okay, so that's automatic placement. I did want to just do a brief rundown of some of the other features. So I'm gonna switch back to the article that I wrote in which I go into more detail, and I talked about manual adjustments, and notice my the article has a GIF, or GIF as the guy who invented it calls it. So one of the other things that you should know about is now style and property settings are live. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, let's go to this thing here, and let's say that I want my tempo text to be larger by default. Or no, actually my dynamics. Let's do it with dynamics so you can see a whole bunch of them at once. It used to be in MuseScore 2, if you went to the style dialog and changed the size of it, you'd have to hit OK, get out of the dialog to see the change, or hit apply, or do other things. And then you might not, because the dialog's taking up so much space, you might not see your change. In MuseScore 3, you can, I'm going to go to the style dialog first so you can see it. I can make changes. Okay. So I can make changes to text styles. So text styles down here, dynamics over here, and I can say make them larger, and if I do make them larger, you're going to see it's going to take effect immediately. So I'm going to hit the up arrow, and there they are, getting bigger. So these changes are all live. Furthermore, now I reset it over here. Furthermore, you don't have to go to the style dialog to make all those changes. A lot of these changes you can do from the inspector. So let me just make the inspector a little wider so I don't have that scroll bar there. All right. So I can select a dynamic, and I can use the font size here to make that one larger. And then when it's the size I want, I can hit the Set as Style button. And now all of them are that way. So this is a new way of being able to control various settings for defaults for things that's a lot easier, a lot faster, a lot more visual than how it worked in MuseScore 2. So cool. I see lots of good comments here on the update. Yeah, it's some really good stuff. So that is a bit about styles. Returning to my article, I guess I will just keep coming to the article. Why not? I have it on my Kindle over here, but I'd rather look at the screen because then I'm looking at you, right? It looks like I'm looking at you. Maybe my eyes are down. So some of the other improvements here, there's the tours. So if you started MuseScore 3, you probably saw these already. I've disabled them for now so I could be doing things without seeing them, but they're really going to be useful for new users especially. So if I go under the Help menu and say Tours, Reset Tours, oh, I should actually show them. So if you were a new user now, and you're like, okay, I want to start entering some notes. What do I do? I don't know what to do. Oh, I see some notes over here. Let me click one of them. And what comes up now is a dialogue explaining some things about how to use it. And then you can keep hitting next to, and it's going to keep telling you about how to enter things. So these tours come up kind of on demand as you do things. I'll just keep going through this. There's like maybe 5 or 6 of them about note input. There we go. It explains all these different things about it. Actually, quite a few about note input. And I could just at any time say, you know what, I'm done. I already know about note input, so I'm going to hit escape. But there's other things. Like one of the things that people often do is like, gee, I can't quite see the rest of that measure. How do I get over there? And they might try to like, I don't see scroll bars. What do I do? Well, maybe I try to drag something. The moment I tried to drag something, here comes up another tour that tells me about the other ways you can navigate. A lot of people don't know about these things. The quickest way to scroll up and down is using your mouse wheel or a touch gesture on your touchpad, like a 2-finger swipe, or shift plus one of those. So I just hit escape to get out of that tour, and you can see now shift. That's weird. I thought that mouse wheel should have been showing, you know, my script that's supposed to show you my clicks. It used to show me the mouse wheel, but now it's not doing that anymore. That's interesting. This is a new computer. Those of you who heard me complain about how slow my computer was while I was broadcasting, Santa did bring me a new computer with my own help. And so I installed that same script, but it appears maybe something's working a little differently about it. Or just the computer itself behaves a little different. Anyhow, that's the scroll wheel. That's 2-finger swipe up and down, or with shift, 2-finger swipe up and down actually moves left and right. So that's not a new feature in MuseScore 3, but the tour that came up and explained it the moment you tried to drag the canvas, that tour that popped up, that's one of the new things in MuseScore 3. So moving on, Timewise note input and editing. This is something that a lot of people really have expressed interest in, and so we have something for it, and you can use it however you like. But as just a simple example, let's say you're creating music for like a hymn, not a hymn, but like a church hymn type music, not what's the word I'm looking for, chant type music, and it's notated, or 20th century, 21st century music that's notated with no time signature, and you just want to start stuffing a measure full of notes. Well, I can do that. So here I've got that note selected. If I press Control Shift D, it inserts a D. I mean, it literally inserted it. It put it right in front of that note and moved the rest of the measure to the left, and it actually increased the size of the measure. It's now 5 beats long. And maybe it's because you're trying to create music where there's different numbers of beats in every measure. Or maybe it's just because you realized you made a mistake and you plan to fix that by deleting the last note when you're done. Well, I can do that. I go here, click the last note, and Control Delete. So that enabled me to insert a note somewhere and then delete it somewhere else. People have asked for that as a way of editing to fix mistakes. I'm personally so used to how MuseScore works that I don't think in those terms. I use cut and paste if I need to move things over. It's very natural to someone who's used MuseScore for a long time, but to newcomers, they often expect, like, gee, if I forgot to enter a B here, I should be able to enter that B and have everything else move over. Well, you can. Control Shift B, and then inserts the B. There's also a whole insert mode here, Timewise insert mode, where when I'm in this mode, everything, I can type C, D, E, F, G, and everything I type just gets inserted. So that's another way of doing this Timewise insert. Okay, do you press Control Shift and the note name? Yep, that's what you do. Control Shift note name inserts, and Control Delete deletes. Control Delete is also the shortcut to delete a whole measure. So if a whole measure selected, Control Delete deletes that whole measure. I'll undo that now. But if you just have a few notes selected, just those 3 notes, Control Delete deletes just those 3 notes. So that's what Timewise insert and delete is about. It's something you really want to kind of play with to get a feel for and how you might want to use it. The feature is there. You can use it how you want. So I'm going to keep moving on here and just cover some of the other new things. Searchable palettes are really nice because, like, for instance, people have a hard time finding the bow symbols, up bow and down bow. Where are they? I guess it's an articulation. Oh, that's kind of a big palette there. Where are they? Oh, and the tour came up and tells me about palettes. I'm going to hit close. But I can type bow, and now only the bow markings are there. So it makes it really easy to find markings, or if you don't know where they are. If you don't know where a crescendo marking is, maybe it's under the lines palette. That's not necessarily the most intuitive place to look for, I would agree, but if I type crescendo, I type the first few letters of crescendo, up comes up the actual hairpin as well as the word crescendo. So those are some of the other things new. Those markings aren't new, but the ability to find them really easily through the search facility there is new. It's also the case that we've reorganized these palettes a little bit. We've moved some things around to make them easier to find. So if you're really used to the palettes, really used to them as they were in MuseScore 2, it might take you a few minutes or some time to get used to the new positions of things, but the idea is to make it easier for people who haven't gotten used to the quirks of MuseScore 2 to find them in more intuitive places. So some things have moved. You ask me what's moved. Okay, I don't remember, to be honest. Under bar lines, there's the repeat markings, but now they're also here under repeats, which is, I think, where people typically look for them. We might have added that at another release before MuseScore 3, I don't remember. But there's certain changes like that we've made, separating out articulations from ornaments, because this used to be a big confusing palette and now it's separated out. Similarly, there's the master palette. If you go to view master palette, this has kind of the master versions of these things, because you can customize these palettes, and in the handbook or in my online course, which I'll mention in a little bit because I always got to plug that, you can customize these palettes here, removing symbols you don't use so often, or adding symbols that maybe you use that aren't here. So the symbols portion of the palette here has just tons and tons and tons of symbols, a lot of special purpose things that most people would never use but exist in the world. Like, what is this thing? This thing is, if I hover over it, it is there you go, even ending symbol. I still don't know what that means, but it's something. But one of the things that we've done now, because this palette is so big, it's now organized. This palette is not new. You actually get to this palette just by pressing Z, but now it's organized into all these different sections. So if you want to see some of the pictograms for drums, there they are. And so it's easier to navigate some of these palettes. Is end start repeat bar line. So the thing is, people have been asking about this, the end start repeat. There is no such thing. What do I mean by that? So I'm zooming out a little bit here. Zoom out a little more. Zooming. Okay. In MuseScore 2, we told a lie. People got used to this lie, but here's a single bar line that has repeat markings on both sides. And you might think, oh, that's a useful thing because that's what happens here. But that's actually a lie. It's not a single bar line. It's really two bar lines butted up against each other. And the most obvious way to know that is to add one here. Do you really want to see the repeats pointing right? No, you don't. It's really one pointing left and a separate one pointing right. So this marking has always been a lie. In MuseScore 3, we stopped lying to you. We stopped lying to you and pretending that that's a single bar line. So whether you're adding the repeat at the end of a line or in the middle of the line, it's two separate things. So you add an end one here and a start one there. We're not lying to you. Now, some people like being lied to. I'm not saying that someday we might not add back that little lie, but I just want people to realize it is a lie. It's always been a lie, and there is something to be said for not having the program lie. So anyhow, that's the story there. This, yeah, so organization of palettes is overall improved, and that ability to search them is nice. There's also some new features. The timeline is kind of nice, and what the timeline does, if I load, let me load a somewhat bigger score. Here's a much bigger score. So the timeline, when I load this score, if I go to View, Timeline, and again, I'm going to get a tour telling me about the timeline. And again, I'm going to close this because I'm just going to talk you through it. But when you go through it yourself, you'll see the tour if you haven't turned them off. What it does is shows me my rehearsal letters. It shows me where the double bar lines and repeat signs and things like that are, and if there's like a DS or a coda, as well as measure numbers. So it makes it really easy to kind of navigate through your score. Oh, I want to go to letter E. Then I just click letter E, and it just takes me right to letter E there in the score. Or I know that there is this, I tend to use double bars and repeat and rehearsal marks together, so they're pretty much always together, as you can see. But there's letter A, there's letter F, and so forth. If there had been any time signature changes or tempo changes, then I would be able to see those. This kind of looks like it's telling me there is one. No, that was just something else displaying there. Okay. It's also showing me all of the instruments here. So I can see, for instance, the violin is not playing here, but is playing just for these few measures. And then, oh, I guess it's playing all these places. Oh, this highlight is showing me what's actually in view. So this section here, the violin is not playing, then it is playing, and these are the measures that are actually being displayed. And then here's where the violin dropped out. So that's another interesting way of looking at things. So when I've written this piece and I'm like, where's that spot where the violins come back in? I don't remember which rehearsal letter it is, but the answer is this is where the first violin comes back in. And then the other violins come in here. So it's a nice way of navigating through your score using a kind of a graphical way without having to remember all the rehearsal lines and things, rehearsal marks. So that's the timeline. So the other kind of new big feature that I wanted to show was the score comparison tool. And the score comparison tool is, well, let me do it with this one because I didn't do many changes here. I've made some changes since I loaded this score, but do I remember what they were? Not necessarily. So what I can do is say View, Score Comparison Tool, and I can say I'm going to compare this score, the current version, to the last saved version, and then hit Compare. And it shows me what I changed. And here again, it's telling me about, oh, it's giving me the opportunity because it's reloading the score and giving me the opportunity to reset. I'm going to say no again. So this is now showing me the current version of my score and the original version, and it's showing me that the one thing I did was drag the tempo, and that is true. I dragged that tempo. If I double click this, it actually highlights the tempo so I can see which one it is. So that's a nice way of comparing two scores. Here it's actually comparing one score against the last saved version of it, but I can also compare against other things. I could say I want to compare this version here against that adjusted version. This is the version here where, oh, I'm confusing myself, but this is what's great about this tool. What is this? This was the version that I had originally saved. So let me go back to the last saved version. This is the version that I had adjusted manually in MuseScore 2. And let's see what some of the changes were there. And so I can now see which changes were made. It's that a change was made to the volta, which is true. I did manually drag that volta in MuseScore 2, and that I had dragged that tempo marking, and that I had dragged that coda marking. So you can either compare a score against an earlier version of that same score, or actually two different scores. As a teacher, I expect to be using, I already have used this as a way of kind of grading assignments. If I have an assignment that has a clear right and wrong answer, like the assignment is write out a B flat major scale, I can have my score that's got the right answer, and then a student submits their answer, and then I run the score comparison, and it just shows me where they got it wrong, if they entered the notes wrong. So I've used this already, and it works great for that purpose as well. So that's the score comparison. Oh, good to see that other people have been using it too. So yeah, I'm curious how people are using that tool, because when it first came up, I was thinking, well, what would I use it for? It's really cool that it's possible, but I didn't have a clear sense of what I might use it for. But now, just thinking of it in terms of comparing against an earlier version of the same score, and also grading student papers, I've gotten a lot of use out of it already. And yeah, also if I create two different versions of a piece because maybe one of them's arranged a little differently than another and I've saved it differently, or maybe you're one of these people who likes to save the score different versions as you go along, just in case something goes wrong, you want to go back to an older version. This would be a way of comparing two different saved versions. So, score comparison tool. So let me close that. When you close that, by the way, you still have the split screen view. Let me turn that off under the View menu, Documents Side by Side. Turn that off so I have just the single view. So that's kind of the main big new features of MuseScore 3. There are a few other things. The playback control, so this is what the mixer now looks like. It actually has things that look somewhat more mixer-like. And in particular for, there's my piano quintet. If I open the mixer, the shortcut is F10. When I open the mixer, you'll see, you may remember that before, violin always had 3 channels, so that you would have the normal, the pizzicato, and tremolo channel separately, and you'd have to set their volume separately, etc. Now they all get controlled together. If you want to control them independently, you can just expand, and now you can see separate controls for normal, pizzicato, and tremolo. So it's a more efficient way of organizing things. There's also something that people who use MuseScore in choral music have requested, in the ability to mute by voice, so that if you have a soprano, alto, tenor, bass arrangement with soprano and alto in one staff, tenor and bass in another staff, you can mute one voice of one staff so that you can hear the playback of just the alto part. So that's another thing that's possible. Also, for people who like to play with MIDI output, you can set the MIDI port and channel for each track of your score. So these are some of the new features of the mixer. For people who really like to get into fine-tuning of playback, there's also the piano roll editor. The piano roll editor is not a new thing. I'm going to right-click a measure and then say piano roll editor. Piano roll editor is not new in itself, but it is greatly improved. I don't really have, this is out of scope for this. At some future cafe, maybe I'll really do an exploration of the piano roll editor. But it's possible to take notes and make them longer, make them shorter, add notes from here, make them louder, make them softer. Basically, treat MuseScore a little more like a sequencer as far as really tweaking how the playback works. If the staccato was too short for you, well, you can make it a little longer in here, and so forth. So that's kind of what the piano roll editor is about. Comparing versions of charts for jazz combo. Yeah, actually, that's the kind of thing that I've done with it as well, as far as the score comparison tool. Okay, the last thing that I really want to talk about here are some notation improvements. There's a bunch of new palette symbols. So like under clefs, we can see there's certain clefs that didn't exist before, like this one here that has a particular meaning. Under the articulations palette, there's some various specialized types of fermatas that are new, some other markings, unstressed markings, they're called, a few extra symbols on here. So that's useful. With the update that came out yesterday is another really nice, useful thing, that we now have something we really should have had all along. There was no technical reason why we couldn't have pizzicato, arco, mute, and open markings right there on the palette. You could always add those before, and then you'd have to go to staff text properties to customize them to do the right thing for playback, but now they're just right there for you. So when I play this, So if I take that passage and I just put a pizzicato there, now I'm just going to show you that you can do it. Well, I'm going to control click these two notes and add it to both at once. All right, that caused it to expand. Now I lost my place. Okay, so let me undo. Where was I? There is where I am. Okay, it's letter E. So I'll redo it and make sure I find letter E. Okay, there it is. Sorry about that. So what happened was adding the pizzicato, it required there to be a little extra space between these staves, and it caused the second system to not fit on that previous page, so it moved over. So that's something that's going to be a thing now, is that adding markings will automatically add extra space. So maybe you don't want that. Maybe in the score you're like, well, how about if I just manually adjust this? I'll just move the dynamic marking here to the left. That's great. Again, don't disable autoplace. Just start moving it to the left, and as soon as there's room, sorry, I must have hit a bad button. Let me go back. I'm going to hit Control F for find, E. Go back to rehearsal letter E. All right, so somehow I did something weird. Undo. All right, yeah, so this space collapsed itself. This, remember, it was kind of vertically like that, but now but because I moved the dynamic to the left, now it was able to close up that space. Anyhow, that's just auto placement again. But now when I play it back, so yeah, the pizzicato markings you can just add from the palette. You don't have to do anything special. So that's nice. One of the other things that's nice is if I want to hide a staff when it's empty, I can do that very easily. It's always been possible to hide empty staves before, but there's just some more flexible ways. Like let's say I only want to hide the piano left hand when it's empty. I don't want to hide anything else. I want to keep all the string staffs all the time. I'm not saying that's a reasonable thing to do. It's just what I'm going to do here. I'm going to right click that bottom thing and say hide when empty always. So now the piano staff, you see, is only, it was 2 staves here when there was notes on both staves, but here on this system here, there weren't notes on the bottom staff, so it's hidden because it was empty. Yet other places in the score where some particular instrument, is there any place where the instrument is empty for an entire staff? Well, that might not be the case, but I can certainly make it be the case. How about if I just delete some notes here? I'll delete these notes from the violin part, and you'll see that even though the violin part is now totally empty here, it did not go away because I didn't ask it to. I only asked that one staff to. So anyhow, these are the sort of more flexible controls we have. We also have support for what are called cutaway staves, in which empty measures disappear individually within a staff. So for instance, let me make the viola part a cutaway staff. Cutaway. And there you go, the empty measures on the, sorry, not viola, that's violin too. Empty measures just disappeared. So that's something that some people like to do in creating their scores for large ensembles. It's also a way of creating alternate notations, like if you want to write out like a little measure above a staff to show this is what this trill should, how you should play this ornament. It's a way of doing that as well. The other thing you can do really easily in MuseScore now, in MuseScore 3, is turn on system dividers. So if I go to Format, Style, and under the System section here, I just turn on dividers. I'll put them on the left. And you see now these dividers automatically show up on any system, on any page that has more than one system. You'll now get these system dividers that can appear by default. And as you rearrange the music, the system dividers appear and disappear where they should. So those are some of the new notation-related features. There's also a few other things. Oh, for jazz. Yeah, I have to show this one. Well, there it is. This is the new jazz font. So for text, it's always been available, but it never affected the actual notation before. Now it does. So as you can see, there's clefs and so forth. So if I take one of my lead sheets that I created, well, actually I can just take this one right here, and I could just, I mean, this isn't a lead sheet, this is an arrangement for string quartet and piano, but it is a jazz piece, and I did use jazz chord symbols. So I could go here under Format, Style, and say that I want to use the Muse Jazz font for my musical symbols as well as for all of my text. And now there it is. So you can see the clefs and everything. Actually, so it didn't affect, that musical text font is not about everything. It's not about this text. It's about text that appears within the score. It's a little hard to explain, but things like dynamics actually are what that will be for. So like the dynamics are that musical text font. If I want all of these texts to be in Muse Jazz font, I would use the inspector to do that, but you don't normally need to do that. The templates do that for you automatically. So this was an old score created in MuseScore 2, and so I will have to update these automatically, but you can also create a style file and then load that style file here. So I could go, so when I said the templates do that automatically, if I go to create a new score and I pick the jazz lead sheet template, say, actually I'm going to pick the jazz combo template because it doesn't make things extra big. So here's, you can see all my style settings here and all the text is the way I want. I can then save that style and call it jazz. And then I can go back to my string quartet score and say I want to load that style. And there you go. So now it's all of those settings have been updated. So those are some of the new features for jazz specifically. So that's the tour that I wanted to give you. It's a lot of stuff. There's more things that I didn't show. The mute and open, yeah, this is new. It just appeared yesterday as part of the 3.0.1 update that just showed up yesterday. So it wasn't part of the original Christmas Eve release, but it was just added. That's a tour of MuseScore 3. And again, in upcoming cafes, I'll go more into depth into some of these features. If people have questions, we'll go more into depth. But I wanted to just give you a good overview of everything as it actually looks in real life. And I hope you find it useful. So next week, actually the next couple of weeks, I've got things going on involving my role as Director of Education, in particular the part of that role that involves dealing with schools and making outreach to schools. I'm going to be at a convention next week for the Colorado Music Educators Association, and I'll be doing a presentation on MuseScore in education there, and then I'll be doing a live webinar also on next Sunday. I'll talk more about that next week, because next week I want to talk a little bit more about the things that I'm doing for education and that I want people to be able to take advantage of. And so next week we'll talk a little bit more about education. So with that said, I think I will sign off and hope that everyone is really excited by all the stuff that's available now in MuseScore 3 and you start playing with it. One thing I keep noticing, this is brand new in the update yesterday also, not a big deal, but the Save Online is now an icon here on the toolbar. It's also there in the file menu, but there's now also an icon for it here, which is kind of nice. All right, so MuseScore 3. If you haven't already, download it in the chat. I put the link to download it right here, right at the very beginning. And then also here's the article on the new features. And then also, because I have to always do this, my online course. So my online course Most of the videos were done using MuseScore 2. Most of MuseScore hasn't really changed, but there's some things that I'm going to need to update from MuseScore 3, and that's going to come. If you sign up for the course, you're going to get those updates. You don't have to wait. Like the book is another matter. If you buy my book, it's MuseScore 2, but then when I update it from MuseScore 3, well, your book sitting on your desk isn't going to automatically get updated. But the course will be. So I encourage people to just go ahead and sign up for the course now. Most of what it says is already applicable to MuseScore 3. But the things that need to get updated will be over time, and you'll automatically get those updates. And some of you I know watching this are enrolled in the course. It's pretty thorough. As I say, it's like 9 hours worth of video, but it's broken down into individual little lessons. I'm not as long-winded as I am in these cafes, because I'm much focused on here's a topic, here's what I need to say about it. And but it covers everything in depth, concisely. There's just a lot of stuff to cover because it covers everything about using the program. So I'm going to post this also so that's there in the chat. There we go. So again, thank you everyone for being here, and feel free to pass this along, because this is live, and those of you who are commenting live, obviously you're watching live, but these are all archived, and this one might be especially useful to pass along to other people who are wondering about what's new in MuseScore 3. Between this video and the article here, you can get a really good synopsis of this is what's new. So everyone, enjoy making music, and I'll see you next week.